Okay, so I'm also a co-founder. So my previous role with the company was COO, but more recently I adopted the title of Chief Value Officer because for our company, value is at the center of everything we do. And if you are in business, then you really have to be thinking about the value that you provide to your customers and to your stakeholders. And I think Dave Thomas did a really good job in talking about the value you create and the differentiation you create, but I'll go into a little bit more detail on that. Okay, so I'm just going to advance to the next slide. So I just wanted to get an idea of who is in the room. So want to understand, for us, we serve B2B, so we sell primarily to businesses. How many of you are selling to consumers, B2C? Okay, just want to get a good view of this. Okay, because I'll be asking questions later. Okay, and who's B2B? Okay, so I'd say more than half. Okay, and who sells to government? Okay, and who's in multiple market to market? Okay, and marketplace then. Okay, interesting. Okay, and then just another question, where are you in your stage of company? Are you just having an idea? Okay, working on a concept? Starting to code? Okay, have early customers? Okay, and have product market fit? Okay, starting to scale? And in growth stage? Okay, for those of you who answered have product market fit, show of hands. Okay, so if you have product market fit and starting to scale, how do you know that you have product market fit? Okay, that's a good answer. Good. Okay, and you know what value you're providing to your customers?
To my limited knowledge, yes.
Okay. Okay, and then how many of you are self-funded? Okay, that's good. You're still self-funded. Friends and family. Okay, angel. Okay, Series A. Oh, okay, so you're probably the most. Yeah, okay. Okay, and how are you guys using AI? Just because AI is really transitioning our world. In fact, it's compressing time even more so, right? It's disrupting jobs, it's disrupting businesses. So how many of you are AI native?
Can I just ask, when you say you're AI native, what do you mean?
I was going to ask that.
Sorry.
But go ahead. So structurally foundational in how the product works. Yep. Your entire platform and offer is driven by AI. AI that you develop yourselves or AI that is provided by others? Okay. So how many then where it's just simply part of the product? Okay. And so part of the product meaning?
It's augmenting a platform with human mentors.
Okay.
So it's
Okay, so basically there's human intervention and process combined.
Not just the process, but a lot of the information is being uploaded, and then AI is sorting through all that.
Okay, and how many are just using AI for external purposes, i.e. to help with marketing and other things, or to do business development, etc.? Okay, so applications. And then what about internally for development process stuff? Okay, good. It's a good mix. Okay, what about pricing maturity? Where are you guys in terms of your pricing maturity? Are you pre-pricing, i.e. you don't really have a price yet, you're just sort of figuring out who is it that you're targeting? How many are pre-pricing? How many of you have well-defined pricing? Okay, predefined? Okay, so that's why you're here. Okay, right now we're just testing it out. We're just throwing it against the wall. We're suspecting it's this. We're just test it out and see what sticks. Okay. How many of you are thinking, okay, it costs me so much to do this, to get it to market, so I'm doing a cost plus type of method? Okay, interesting. The two most advanced companies are cost plus. What about market following? Are you following the market as well? i.e. what are your competitors? Okay, and how many of you are basing your price on value? i.e. justifying your price based on value. Okay, and then how many of you are outcomes based? Meaning that, so one example is if I get to a certain level of performance, then I'm going to take a share of that because I'm getting to the outcome that I promised you, so I'm going to charge you as such. Okay, no one's, okay, that's good. We should talk. Okay, so here are the stats. So NA, that was fairly consistent with this room. 60% of you this is the statistically, 60% typically are throw at the wall. 13% cost plus, market following 15. 10% of firms are looking at value based, and 2% on outcomes based. Okay. Okay, so now we'll get to the agenda of what we're actually going to talk about. Okay, so first I'm going to do a few framing principles, why pricing matters, and I'm going to talk about value, and then I'm going to switch it over to Stephen to really talk about the more interesting topic, which is price. Okay, and then I think throughout this we're going to put in the theme of how AI is changing this. So this presentation is a bit different from the one we gave last year, because as I said, AI is disrupting everything we do. In fact, for our company, work that would have taken 6 weeks is now reduced to less than an hour. Okay, so framing principles. So pricing is where all things come together. How many of you would agree with that? Okay, well, we'll try then. Okay, so it's through pricing where you want to be able to articulate your value, because if you cannot articulate your value, then you can't really come to a price. Okay? So then when Dave was talking about, the hotel rooms, for instance, right? Then you have to really look at, well, how is it that you're creating value? So as a person who just came back from a month of travel, I stayed at a number of hotels. And so what did I look for each of those hotel stays? And how is it that those hotels were creating value for me? So as a business traveler and as a tourist, I guess, I needed both aspects of the business traveler as well as the tourist. And so I was really looking at how is it that they were creating value. Then the next dynamic of that is who are you selling to? So again, who is your buyer? And again, Dave covered this. He talked about segmentation. So how many of you segment your market based on firmographics? Okay, let me explain that. So do people understand what I mean when I say segmentation on firmographics? Okay, so let me explain that. So segmentation by firmographics is typical, where you look at the firmographics of a company, i.e. we target companies of X size, i.e. number of employees. We target companies who have a certain amount of revenues. We target companies of certain type of industries. Okay, so how many people target their customers based on firmographics? Okay. Then the next part I'm going to ask you is, how well are you communicating value to those firmographics? Okay, so then I'll give an example. And this is more of a B2C example. And we used to show this where you have, if we were to sell to an individual, you have a person who lives in a castle. You have, and this is a male. And this person is how old now? In their 70s, maybe? 70s. They both have children. Would they buy the same things? So in this case, the two individuals, Prince Charles and Ozzy Osbourne. King Charles, sorry. King Charles. And I was born in the UK. Shame on me. Okay, so you can see if you just did it by firmographics alone, these two people have very, very different buying behaviors and two very, very different needs. So that's why you have to go back to think about how you're communicating value to each of these buyers. And then from there, once you actually understand how they're perceiving the value that you create, then you can think about how you capture that value. And the way that you capture that value is in the way that you price. Okay? Okay, so in order for price to be the good characteristics, or I guess when pricing what works well, is that there are three characteristics that pricing has to have. First of all, it has to be fair, right? Pricing must be perceived to be fair. You cannot appear to be ripping people off, right? People want a good deal, right? It has to be a win-win situation. You want to provide value for what is provided, and as a company, for your customers, you have to be willing to walk away, right? And that's where it becomes very important to actually segment on customers who find value in the same way. So which are your customers which are finding value and benefit in the same way, right? So it's not just firmographics. And of course, different stakeholders receive and pay for value in a different way, and you want to be able to balance that out. So then when we talked about, well, I'll probably get to that. I'll talk about life cycle later. I'll stay focused on this. Transparency. Okay, in order for, this is actually related to fairness as well. In order for pricing to be fair, it has to be transparent, right? So it has to be clear in terms of what people are buying. So we've worked with customers where, their pricing wasn't transparent because, these are large enterprise customers that we had, and they kept on innovating on their product offering. And so eventually their pricing just got so confusing. You basically had to call a sales rep, and it would take, a few days to price, configure, and quote you the deal, right? And then people were wondering, well, how do we even come up with this pricing? Sales were confused. They couldn't come up with an easy price for their customers. Customers were thinking, well, what am I being charged for? So you really want to have pricing simple to understand, and there's a clear map between the value they get and the price you're going to charge. The other part of this is the consistency. So you have to be consistent across the board, because even though well, for us, we think your pricing should be transparent. So those of you, I think all of you said you had a website. So you're winning half the battle if you can have your price on your website and be transparent about it, because then there's a notion of fairness, and you know that what people are paying is what they're going to get, right? So there's consistency. We're not going to pay favorites here, although sales reps will always say, well, Karen, I really think, I should just get by this customer because we need to have, this is it'll be a good flagship account, right? But then you have to be reasonable in saying, well, what am I giving up in order to negotiate that price? And of course, customers do talk to each other, right? So if you're giving a deal to one customer, guess what? Your other customers are going to expect that deal as well. Okay, so those are the three elements. Okay, so we came up with, I don't know if we came up, did we come up with this? Okay, well, we may or may not have come up with this because we come up with a lot of things. But we have a framework called the value cycle. So really, again, as I said, value is at the core of everything we do. You want to understand, first and foremost, how you're creating value. So the best way to start a company is to say, hey, there's a gap in the market. People need X. They would find it valuable if they could do X. And I'm going to create a company that fills in that void. How many of you started your company that way? Okay, that's good. Because there's a lot of founders who come up with, I think there's this great idea, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to find the market for it. So it's good to know that you guys actually are responding to your market, because you got to create value, not for yourself. Of course, we all, as business people, want to create value for ourselves, but the number one group to create value for is your customer. And then I've said it a number of times, communicate that value. How do you come up with a consistent way to communicate that value? And so right now, as you are a small company, as the founders, you should be pretty aligned in how you communicate that value. But then as you grow and you have to bring in marketing people, your sales people, how do you make sure that your team is communicating value in a consistent way that is consistent with your brand and your brand promise? Right? So that's why having a way to really articulate that value, measure that value in a consistent way becomes important for that consistency. And then, of course, you want to understand how you're delivering that value. I think one of you in Dave's presentation said that you had a product that sells itself. Okay, so what is your product? It's a marketplace. And how does it sell itself? Yeah, but you got to still sell to those people to get to the marketplace, right? Okay, so you need to understand how you're delivering value. And so this is where I'm going to talk about the customer life cycle, right? So the customer life cycle is want to think about the journey that you are developing with your customer. So Dave and Leslie talked about marketing, because marketing is where you're going to build awareness, right? How is it that your prospect, how is it that your buyer is going to find you? So you want to create an awareness package. And that awareness is going to include, hey, what is the benefit we're going to provide to you? What is the value you have in working with us? as compared to our next competitive alternative. And remember, there's always an alternative competitor if it is even doing nothing, right? Then you want to say, once you create that awareness, then you've got to say, okay, how am I going to win that deal, right? So when you're in a competitive situation, which you always are, then you're going to say, hey, this is how my offering is going to make a difference in your life, and I'm going to provide greater value than my competitors, and this is how. And you can win on time to that value, i.e., I can provide you the results faster. I can provide you better returns or higher returns. But you want to understand how is it and when you're going to deliver that value. And then, of course, you're going to want to document, how is it that you're faring over time, right? Because how many of you guys are selling software or subscriptions? Okay, so there's going to be a time when your customers are going to be asked whether or not they want to renew. And so that point of renewal is when you've got to prove that the claims that you made in sales actually worked, so that it will be easier for your customer success team or your value team to say, yep, this is the value we generated for you in the past year or 6 months, or you have the quarterly business reports. And so you want to be able to document that, so then you can recapture it in the price and the subscriptions that you're going to charge them. Okay. And now you got this other thing that comes into play, which is AI. So AI is now being used at every step of this value cycle, right? So not only do people use Google, I mean, when ChatGPT came out, I said to Stephen, it's going to replace search, right? Okay. And guess what? People are using their AI agents to do research about your firm. They're using research to understand who your competitors are. And, of course, they're driven by these large language models. So what is it on your website that you're doing to make it AI friendly and AI readable? Have you thought about that? So maybe one of these guys who are AI native have a solution for you, right? But it's being used by both buyers and sellers. So again, when you think about I'm from an older generation, so there was a world where people would put out RFPs, requests for proposals, right? But now I can pretty much feed an AI to say, how well does my firm, based on all the publicly available information out there, how well do we stand against our competitors to win this RFP? Right? Okay, so AI also has to be part of your pricing strategy as well. Okay. Pricing and buyer. Okay, so here's some steps in terms of what you can do then. So develop a set of buyer prompts and test your website's pricing page and compare this to your competitors. So this is how you can sort of see how is it that your pricing compares against, and you can drive it through AI. In fact, you can go as far as starting earlier, which is to say, hey, given my company, who are the buyers? What should my ICP look like? And heck, for the heck of it, what should my segmentation look at? Can you see how it's replacing the marketing jobs here? Okay. Develop a set of buyer prompts and share these prompts with potential buyers, right? So then that's where, in the RFP days, right, I used to be in the professional services selling Microsoft and IBM solutions, right? So we always used to write these RFPs. But what would happen is we knew which were the potential providers we would use. And we would actually invite those providers to do an RFI, request for information, right? Which is essentially a way to ask them to help us to write that RFP and help us to understand what the heck are the requirements that we need in order to build something successful, right? So this tactic, again, using AI, right? You can feed all of these things into your AI to say, okay, what is a typical RFP that's going to come across my way if I have to win the deal, right? But then things are being even more simplified now, right? People aren't even going to RFPs, right? People are just saying, okay, search out there and find me the best person who's going to get me to a certain outcome. And then, of course, you want to make sure that your website has we use value model, but think of it as the value propositions, and I'll get into the details of not just the elevator value proposition that Dave said, but it's more about how you actually quantify each of these different elements. Because then you want to have those value points very easy to find. Then you want to make sure that your pricing and pricing metrics can also be accessed by the AI because, of course, a decision point is going to be on return on investment, and people want to know what their long-term spend is going to be, right? Because oftentimes, in early startup mode, you'll say, okay, I've got to get this customer, I've got to test it out, and hey, I've got to learn from it, which is fair, right? But then there's people who you'll give the software away for or give your solution for free, but they won't even touch it because why? It's still a cost. So that cost to them is their investment of time, and it's also a risk of change to what they're currently doing. So if you're going to change the way that people are approaching their current business, you have to have a very compelling reason as to why they should risk that on you, right? And if you don't have that, then it's going to be very difficult to get to that customer acquisition. Okay, make it easy for the AI to connect value and price, and do this for all of your use cases, right? So again, yes, you may only have one market segment, as per Dave's. Having more than one focus is not, or three is not a good thing. But even for each of your segments, you may have multiple use cases. So you need to understand the value created for each of those use cases. Okay, so value modeling. Okay, so we talk about value propositions. So typically in our world, we're always talking about the value in terms of the economic factors. We also talk about value from an emotional perspective. And then in certain realms of business, the community value drivers are actually a necessity for doing business. So if you're in the ESG space, for instance, in the mining industry, forestry, you have to care about the community value drivers. It's kind of a gateway to do business. Okay, and then, of course, you want to have that differentiated value, but you should also know what is the undifferentiated value as well. Okay, so I've got some models as to how you determine these things. Okay, so for emotional value drivers, and by the way, to have both emotional value drivers and economic value drivers would put you in a much stronger position when it comes to pricing power. Okay, so when you think about, we used Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay, so if we think about, I think Dave used the car scenario. Okay, so when I was a starving student, oh, Stephen probably doesn't believe I was a starving student. When I was a starving student, right, I guess that doesn't really work. Okay, so when I was a starving student, I had to have a car to get me from point A to point B, right? So it was a kind of bare minimum car, to just sort of say, hey, and even today my parents are like, well, Karen, it's just a car. It gets you from point A to point B. Who cares about all these other things, right? But then, of course, there's a certain set of buyers who will say, hey, I'm willing to spend X amount of dollars to have X, Y car because, hey, it's really fun to drive X, Y, Z car. right? So emotion plays a big part in the buying process. So if you are lucky enough to have a product that sells by itself, you probably don't, do you have to care about emotion? Yes, of course you do. Right? You always have to care about emotion. And if you have, and I guess this is the other question I should ask. How many of you guys, when you sell, is it sales-led growth, i.e. you're selling by having a conversation and you have a sales team which has to do the sale? Okay, that's what I expected. And then how many are expecting the sale to just happen product-wise, i.e. like HubSpot does it? I've got a website, a storefront, and then people try it. Of course, there might be a trial period, and then they sort of land on a certain area, and then they just buy it. Okay? How many of you are relying on relationship and partners to sell? Okay, good. Okay, so in all of these cases, that relationship, those conversations, you have to read the emotion. What is it going to do from an emotional perspective for your customer? Okay, we'll talk about the economics now. So economic value estimation, and it's called EVE. It's an estimation because all of these are estimates. Right? It's very difficult to get everything to the dollar and cents, even though we've tried it. And then our customers are saying, wow, the numbers are so precise. How do you get to that? But then it becomes a question of credibility, right? So these things are estimations. Value drivers measure the impact of your solution to your customer's P&L. Everyone knows what P&L is? Profit and loss. Okay? Relative to alternative. And you always have to consider your shortcomings and unique costs relative to alternative. So if you're in a displacement situation, i.e. you're looking to displace a competitor, then you're going to think about, hey, these are all the positive value things that I'm bringing to you. A negative value driver might be switching costs, right? Customers already invested in something else, but there's going to be a cost to them switching over to you. And then, so you want to be able to ascertain that. Okay, so then in terms of economic value drivers, there are 6 key economic value drivers that people are always trying to get to, right? So in today's world, everyone is about getting to the upper line of increased revenues. How is it that I am going to help? So this is not about us, right? This is about our customer. How is it that I am going to help you, Mr. Customer, to increase your revenues? Is that what you're selling on? I'm going to help you increase your market share. I'm going to help you increase your market size. I'm going to improve your overall pipeline metrics, i.e., who's familiar with pipeline? Okay, pipeline is the rate at which you get an awareness to an actually close a sale, and then you can talk about extensions of renewals, right? So how quickly can I translate a person who knows of my company to actually close a deal? Can I help you with that? So that's an increased revenue play. Or I'm going to make it more efficient for you by decreasing your operating expenses, right? So I'm going to save you money by using my application. We're going to either, some of the costs are, I'm going to reduce your employee cost. I think we did this for recruiting, but I'm going to reduce employee cost so that they could be repurposed to do something else. I'm going to reduce your cost of goods to provide X, Y, Z. I'm going to streamline, automate your processes. It's going to make you more efficient. You'll be able to have more throughput on your delivery of services. Okay, so that's decrease operating expenses. Decrease operating capital. I'm going to help you reduce your inventory. I'm going to have you have faster collections, faster accounts receivable. or decrease capital investment. I'm going to make you more productive with the existing assets you have. That's yours, right? I'm going to defer capital investments because I'll get more use out of what you already have. Then you don't have to buy and invest so much in your capital. Decrease risk. Hey, security first. I'm going to minimize your risk for being hacked. I'm going to reduce your claims against liability. I'm going to also, make sure that your brand is on point. Increase options. I'm going to give you more flexibility in how you tailor and offer your goods, expanding your paths to revenue. And I can have ability. And those are only examples, right? So I think it's very important for you guys to think about, how is it that you are doing these things for your customer? Okay, so I'm going to pick on people now. Okay, Daniel, because you're looking at your phone. What is it that you do for your customers? So are there any things on this list that you're helping your customer do?
I do 2C, but I increase their, no, probably not. Flexible benefit package tailored to individual needs.
Okay. Anyone else want to try?
We increase our customers' efficiency, employee efficiency.
Employee efficiency. How?
By supporting remote and hybrid work environments, make them extremely efficient in having the same type of collaboration in a virtual environment as they would have in a real space.
Nice.
Operating capital and decrease capital investment. And the reason is my company does cloud cost optimization.
Cloud cost optimization.
So it automatically reduces cost of all those things.
Okay.
So we decrease risk for crisis
I'm just
response.
going to ask everyone if you can stand up in terms so that everyone can hear you. And also, just before you do that, just say your company's name and what it does.
Time to pitch.
Crisis response and social media platforms. So it can also just detect misinformation, disinformation, narratives. So we decrease stakeholder risk for the company, so it doesn't increase brand value.
Okay, got it. Good. Okay. Okay, so I think I already spoke about the shortcomings. So again, unique costs. So what are the negative things, right? So I know that, well, my husband, he does radiology sales, right? So then obviously it's a very sticky technology, but then, the unique costs are the tremendous amount of processing power that is required to run those things. So that is a negative value driver, right? So you have to know what your costs are in terms of the overall math. Okay, differentiation. Okay, so when we think about differentiation, then we're going to think about, well, there's this huge space of what your customer needs are, right? And as I said, as I was asking you guys, how many of you guys are filling that void of that space? So then that is essentially this huge opportunity of where is it that I can potentially innovate it. Okay, and then the other piece then is you have to think about, well, where's my alternative playing in that space? And then, of course, you have your offer as well, right? So then if I think if I progress it. Is it progressing? Okay, so then when you think about it, where you and your competitor meet, this is all commodity, right? And then your differentiation then is going to be here. And then, of course, your competitor's differentiation is here. So then what you're hoping, well, I shouldn't say, you can't build a business on hope. I think people have said that. So what you're trying to do then, or what your aim is to say, I've got to get my differentiation valued more than what my competitor differentiation is. Right? So how do you do that? And so that's why you have innovation for your product, right? And so how you do that is you actually gauge and measure consistently what is it that your customer is valuing at your for your particular offer at this particular time, but how potentially may that value evolve down the road. Because what you're offering today may be today's innovation, but it's tomorrow's commodity. Does that make sense? Because if you think about it, let's think about the Dave example of the, I think he used the iPod, right? Remember, who was it targeted at first? Successful business people who needed to do X, Y, Z. But how many of you have Spotify now? Heck, I use Spotify, right? Think about how the market has shifted. Oh, are those people selling to the business buyer? They're selling to consumer now. Think of all these great B2B things which have been commoditized and selling to business, to consumers, just because it can be done so much easily and efficiently. Okay. Okay, so now I'll turn it over to Stephen.
Thank you very much, Karen. Okay, so you cannot price anything effectively if you do not understand value. So that is why Karen carefully took you through all of the principles of how you understand your value. Because if you haven't done that, you're wasting your time to talk about pricing. So here we go. But let's start, though, with a little mini course in what are the different pricing methods that you can use. So the basic method that many people start off with is cost plus. And outside of the software world, I would say that about 70% of industrial things are still priced based on cost plus. But recently, over the last decade, we haven't done that in software. Why don't people use cost plus in software? Well, it's a bad idea to do it, but any ideas as why isn't cost plus being used in B2B SaaS software? Great. Exactly. Over the last 10 years, we've lived in a world where the incremental or the variable costs on software have been close to zero. Is anyone seen that changing? Yeah. Well, AI has dramatically changed how we're thinking about the role of cost in B2B software. So we lived in a sort of a fantasy land for the last 10 to 20 years where we didn't worry about operating costs because they were minimal. And operating profit ratios on a good software company were 90% or more. That is radically changing today because of the costs, of the compute costs and the operating costs for AI models. So when you look at someone like, it's boring to always pick on OpenAI. So let's say Anthropic. Actually, no, you know what? OpenAI is better. And it's not a better software. Claude actually is getting better results right now than GPT. But who here is using OpenAI's reasoning models, like O3, right? Now, the way that OpenAI prices those models is really interesting, right? They price your input tokens and your output tokens. Okay, they've always done that. They also price reasoning tokens. There's been some good research over the last month or so on what percentage of tokens for different types of prompts are reasoning tokens. Does anyone want to guess what the range is? Boy, if you're using it, we better know this, right? Actually, you answered the last one, so I'll go the guy beside you. Yeah, you. Oh, okay. Oh, the question is, what percentage of the tokens in a O3 reasoning prompt response are actually reasoning tokens versus input or output tokens? Yeah, most of us have no idea, right? Anyone want to try and take a guess what the range is? Gold star, that's exactly right. I mean, it can be lower. Depending on the prompt, it can be as low as 10%. But in most cases, it's closer to 70%. So 70% of your cost, if you're using a reasoning model, is actually this sort of beneath the iceberg kinds of tokens. Really interesting things happening. But let's go on to the next one, market following pricing. So how much does OpenAI charge for the basic version of ChatGPT? Everyone knows, right? $20, right? Except for Pro, they charge $200. And how much does Perplexity charge? They charge $20 too. Do you think that when OpenAI actually priced ChatGPT, they did a special study. It was on their Discord channel. They did a study of price tolerance, for AI assistants. So we replicated that study, and we found that there were 3 reasonable price points for ChatGPT at the time, according to Van Westendorp pricing study. This is all in our blog, by the way. Those of you who are interested in this sort of geeky stuff, come and ask us later, and we'll show it to you. And the price points were $10, $20, and $30, roughly. I'm rounding here, but roughly those. And OpenAI chose the $20 point, and then that cascaded through the market. How much is Salesforce saying its Agentforce agents are going to charge per transaction? Anyone know? It's $2. Now, if you actually look at the data that Agentforce buyers have shared against their contracts with Salesforce, I might note, most people are actually paying significantly less than that. But that $2 is sort of like framed a price. Oh, an agent transaction is $2. What was another super interesting thing that OpenAI did? Was it 2 weeks ago now? 3 weeks ago? They said that they were going to put agents out into the market, and how much were they going to charge for a PhD level agent? $20,000 a month. Yeah. So, and I got a great email from a friend of mine who's he's in Barcelona. He's developing an agent-based company, and he said, "This is fantastic. OpenAI has just reset the framing for how much people expect to pay for agents. So you've got Salesforce agent out there at $2, and now you've got OpenAI saying, well, we're going to charge you $20,000 a month for a PhD equivalent reasoning agent." Now, are they? Who knows? Probably not. But it set a frame, right? And these framing effects are super important in pricing. Another one the pricing model that you see a lot is input-based pricing. So think of your mortgage, if you're like me, unfortunate enough to still have a mortgage, right? The bank rates, the prime rate is an input into the pricing of the mortgage. There's lots of things in finance that use input-based pricing. There's also a surprising number of AI native companies that use input-based pricing, where the input is the price of the tokens. So input-based pricing is pushing its way into the AI and agent economy. Value-based pricing, so this is what Karen and I have been talking about. It's what we're known for. It's, with value-based pricing, you understand in great detail how you create value, who you create value, and then you design a pricing model in which some of the variables in your value model are used in order to price. So this is really the secret sauce, and I'll have to speed up a bit if we're going to get to those slides. Okay. Pricing is also changing very rapidly. So if you go to the big old heavy metal pricing software vendors, Pros, Vendavo, Zilliant, PriceFX, they use dynamic pricing. How many people here have seen that ad where there's a chicken pecking at a keyboard, and that chicken is setting the price of your airline ticket? It's a great ad, right? Well, in fact, there are some massive AI-based software companies that are actually the chicken. They're actually doing load balancing and demand forecasting, and they're using all of that information to set the price of your ticket. Those same software platforms are used now for hotel room pricing. They're used increasingly for parking. So parking is increasingly using dynamic pricing. And there's always a lot of talk that it's going to be used widely in B2B software. So I was at a big pricing conference a couple of years ago, and one of a friend of mine who's a senior guy at one of these companies was up on stage, and he said, within 2 years, all B2B software is going to be using dynamic-based pricing. So I couldn't help myself. I got up and said, I won't say his name, but anyway, Joe, does that mean that you're willing to price your software using dynamic-based pricing? Of course not. There's no way these guys have any intention of, I think it's fair to say, ever pricing their platforms using dynamic pricing. Outcomes-based pricing, there's a lot of talk about outcomes-based pricing these days. There's even, it's relatively new, I think it's less than 2 years old, but there's a poster child for outcome-based pricing in AI, or in agentic AI. Anyone know who it is, who I'm thinking of? So this is Intercom Fin AI. So Intercom Fin AI has become a touchstone for outcomes-based pricing with AI agents. And what Intercom's Fin AI does is that it's a customer support system, and you only pay them if your ticket is resolved. If the AI cannot resolve the ticket and it goes to a human, then you don't need to pay them. That's a great example of outcomes-based pricing. Outcomes-based pricing is seen as the Valhalla, the destination we're all trying to get to. But there's 3 criteria that you need to meet to really be able to execute on outcomes-based pricing. Anyone want to take a crack at what those 3 criteria are? Okay, this is great. Here. Yes, very good. That's the first. 2 more. Okay. Okay, but that's not a criteria for adopting it. It's 2 more. At the back?
Yeah, maybe you really need to have certain confidence that you can achieve certain, otherwise you're always going to.
I'm going to give you that. It's a little bit different. The third one is predictability. Buyers and sellers hate stuff that's unpredictable. So you have to be able to predict. And then the other one is attribution. We all want to say, my software is going to do, my software is going to make your code better. That's a bit too generic, but anyway. People are going to say, well, that was actually because our engineers worked really hard to use your software. So there's this attribution problem. So to succeed in outcome-based pricing, so if you can do outcome-based pricing, you absolutely should, but only if you can meet the 3 criteria. You can agree on what the outcome is. Sounds easy, it's actually not. Second is you can agree on the attribution of the outcome. For those of you who are super geeky, this is already being done in healthcare through causal machine learning, causal ML, and causal models. So that problem is also going to be solvable. And third is that you need to be able to predict it. This is why it was so good for Fin AI, right, from Intercom, right? Very clear. Did the customer ticket get resolved or not? Attribution, well, there was nobody involved, so clearly you can attribute all of it to Fin AI. And third, people who do customer support, They have scads of data. It is easy to make predictions on how many tickets are going to get issued and intercom on how they're going to get resolved. So if you fulfill those three conditions, then by all means use outcome-based pricing. If you don't, probably off the table. Although maybe you should be planning on how you can get to meeting those three conditions. So just to pump Ibbaka for a second here, Ibbaka is also promoting something called generative pricing. This is dynamic pricing for agentic and generative AI. And the idea here is that we are moving into a world where configuration becomes dynamic and value-driven. So I'll give you an example. There's a category of software, BSS. These are the operating layers for the virtual mobile networks. 5 years ago, say, it probably took 18 to 24 months to stand up a BSS. Over the last 3 years, there have been people with modularized solutions who can stand up a BSS for you in 3 to 6 months, closer to 3 months these days. Today, there's a company called Totango that uses generative AI to configure its a BSS. Anyone want to guess how long it takes Totango to stand up a BSS? A day? I heard a day. Anyone want to go lower? Yep. Totango can stand up a BSS in 30 seconds. Holy crap, right? Now, if you're one of the other companies, you should be, trying to buy Totango or trying to find a new business. Totango. Totango. I think I've got that right. But I'm an old guy, so I'm pretty sure I've got that one right, though. I'm just going to call out a big problem that Ibbaka is going to have. Karen described this earlier, right? 12 months ago, it took approximately 2 months for us to come up with a value model for you. Today, using generative AI, and we have we have a RAG architecture, blah blah blah. Use a lot of JSON, but we can now do that in easily under an hour. Our pricing model is based on number of models. As we roll this new functionality out into the market, probably as agents or maybe as a part of our platform, we've just made it really easy for you to create models. Do we still want to fence our pricing on number of value models? I'm going to guess that we don't. So the dynamics of how you think about pricing are being completely rewired by agentic AI and generative AI. Okay, so just got, you're going to hold me to my time, right, Angie? So there's really only 3 pricing strategies. You can do market skimming. So if you think back to the chart where Karen was showing and you had your differentiation value, you can price towards the top of that. You can do market following, where you take a relatively neutral approach, or you can do penetration pricing. So for our last mass participation question for today, who here is doing penetration pricing, pricing low to get market share? Okay. And who here is taking a relatively neutral stance? And who here is doing premium pricing? Good for you. Okay, this is actually the only slide from today that you need to remember. That the core idea of pricing is that you have value metrics and pricing metrics. So a value metric is the unit of consumption by which a user gets value. A pricing metric is the unit of consumption for which a buyer pays. These are 2 different things, but you need to connect them. And that is the secret of pricing, and how you connect them is the critical thing. So here's some examples. A value metric is how many kilometers. Oops, I don't know why we have kilometers. Oh yeah. How many kilometers you can drive on 1 liter of gas? Boy, this is an old deck, right? Do cars still use gas? But I don't actually. I almost never drive a car. I couldn't understand what Karen was talking about why she needed a car. But it's like, what was your bicycle broken? But anyway, and the pricing metric is dollars per liter. For a piece of equipment, it could be the output per hour, and then you have to pay a price for a big chunk of steel. People still sell that stuff. The really interesting one I want to point to here, though, is the one at the bottom. This is Intercom Fin AI that we were talking about earlier. What's interesting about this? The pricing metric and the value metric are identical. If you can get there, you have kick-ass pricing that's going to win in the market. So a little story. Karen told me to take this slide out. She said, boy, you're showing your age. I forgot to bring my cane. Long time ago, I lived in Montreal. I grew up in Montreal, and there was a company called Pratt & Whitney, made engines. Very successful company. And there was another engine maker. Actually, there are two others, General Electric and Rolls-Royce. GE, and GE was not the dominant company in the market. It's really funny to tell this story. By the way, this story, if you tell it in Europe, you have to tell it about Rolls-Royce, and then if you tell it in North America, you have to tell it about GE, and it's exactly the same story. And I've never been able to figure out which one is true. But we're North America. The European version is true? Maybe. I don't know. So GE had invested a huge amount, hundreds of millions of dollars in developing a new engine that was going to have lower maintenance costs. And this was fantastic. They took it out and they took it to the airframe makers and to the airlines and said, you guys have to buy our engine because it's going to cut your maintenance costs by 40%. And they thought, this is going to be great. We're going to completely blow apart the market. People are going to pay us a premium. But the airline said, yeah, maybe. But we don't really believe you. So do you know what GE did? They stopped selling engines. Instead, they leased engines, and you only had to pay for the engine for the amount of time it spent pushing an airplane. Power by the hour. This totally revolutionized the engine market. Pratt & Whitney did not keep up with this, and they went from being a strong first to a distant third, and there was a lot of people in Montreal that lost their jobs. Plenty of my friends' parents worked at Pratt & Whitney and lost their jobs. So this is an example of when you shift the pricing metric so that it is more closely associated with value, you can dominate an industry. The other example that we could use here is Google AdWords, right? Think once upon a time, not that long ago, when I did stuff in the media business in the 90s, when Karen and I were running one of our early companies together, people paid per impression. Does anybody buy media today for impressions? If they do, they're crazy, right? You pay per click. Pay-per-click is a much better proxy for value than impression. And there's a little company, it's in trouble now because search is changing, but that made, I think it's worth $3 trillion right now. Anyway, it's worth a lot of money, Google. So I'm just going to go through this quickly. I'll really fast before Angie hooks me.
It is Rolls-Royce.
Pardon?
It is Rolls-Royce.
Actually, no, GE says that it did. Oh, it says in our slide GE? Well, okay. So quickly here, most of the companies here are probably in the innovation or early adoption stage, right? And the really interesting thing to understand is pricing changes across the adoption cycle, the technology adoption cycle. This is Geoffrey Moore. Sure everyone, not sure. This is Roger Moore. Okay. Anyway, sure everyone knows this, this technology adoption life cycle model. But the really interesting thing here is that people have different willingness to pay at each stage of this. So we'll talk first of all about innovators. Once upon a time, I was creating actually a new category of company for software for value management. Same space that Ibbaka is in now, but this is an earlier company. And we went around and we talked to all the really smart people about value management and said, this is the software we're going to build. Do you think this is a good idea? And everyone said, yeah, this is a brilliant idea. Go ahead and do it. So we went and built it. And then we went back to these people and said, how much will you pay for it? And they go, what, us? McKinsey? Pay you? No, we might do you a favor and use it. Innovators hate paying for stuff. So you go around and you talk to a bunch of innovators and you think, oh wow, this is fantastic. We're gonna make a lot of money, but innovators don't like paying. The people that will start paying are the early adopters. Why do early adopters buy? Does anyone know? Pardon? That's not why. No, no, that's the innovators. To be first, but not just to be first, right? To get an advantage over their competition. So early adopters buy because other people have not bought, right? So I'm going to buy this because this will give me an edge because my competitors don't have it. So for this company, we found some early adopter buyers, thank goodness, and they were willing to pay $600,000 for the subscription. We thought, wow, fantastic, we are going to be incredibly rich. But then you get over, you have the chasm, and you get over into the early majority. Why do early majority people buy? Right, because their peers are buying. Right, so Jamie over there has bought it. Therefore, I better buy it too. So when we got into the early majority, anyone want to guess what price we got for it? It wasn't $600,000. $60,000. And this is pretty typical. There are other things that we can say about pricing as you go through the tornado in Main Street, but since most people in this room are probably with innovators, early adopters, and early majority, those are the things to remember. Don't get discouraged if the innovators won't pay you, because that's not who they are. Early adopters, don't be afraid to charge them a big premium. Premium pricing for early adopters. You actually turn off early adopters if you give them too big a discount. But then when you get into early majority, and Dave talked about this, for early majority, then you're going to really have to work hard to align your price with your value. And let's skip through here. So so some last thoughts here. What pricing is about is being able to create, communicate, deliver, and document value, and only then are you in a position where you should be thinking about how you capture it. So price to create and capture value for all. Thank you.